I hope by now you can all see us, hear us, experience us. Thank you so much for joining us. We have 45 minutes together, and we're going to have a conversation about AI's impact on developer productivity. I'm Laura. I'm the CTO at DX. We're a developer insights company. I'm excited to be joined by Dr. Philippa Hardman, who I'll just call Phil. Dr. Hardman, Phil, is one of the smartest people I know, which is why I asked her to join me. She's just recently founded an AI startup. She advises the UN on AI. She is a Cambridge scholar. She helped Oxford build their first massive online open course. She has just a ton of experience in AI, and not just like what AI is, but why, which I think is really crucial to the conversation that we're going to have today about using AI to improve, change, etc., developer experience and developer productivity. So welcome, Phil. Nice to have you here.
Well, thank you so much. That was an incredible introduction. I'm
Yeah,
definitely not
no
winning
pressure.
in terms of background image, but otherwise I sound amazing. So thank you. It's so nice to be here. Hopefully we can have an interesting chat. I'm excited to hear from you and from everyone online. So thanks for joining.
Yeah, wonderful. And we have a big group, but we do want this to feel a little bit more like a conversation. And Phil and I were just chatting a little bit before we went live. It's always good to know sort of who you're talking to, who you're talking with, what they're interested in. And so we'll just pause for like a minute here. If you could just think, what is the thing that you're most excited slash terrified about about AI coming into the scene, either in a professional setting, a development setting, or maybe just in general. But we'd love to know like what are the burning questions you have? What are you worried about? What are you excited about? Because we do want to make sure that this time that we spend together is useful for you. So let us know. Just drop it in the chat. We'll wait patiently while you think of something.
Maybe I'll Google locations.
Oh yeah, good idea. Oh, deepfakes are terrifying.
Yes, they are. Did
We
you
talked
see the
about being go ahead, Phil.
Sorry, I was just going to say I saw a very convincing deep fake voice this week in the news that was Joe Biden telling Democrats not to go and vote. I was like, yeah, maybe AI is not such a great idea after all.
I think elections and AI make me definitely scared.
Uh-huh.
Um, wow, so many
Mm.
really, really good, thoughtful answers in here, and quite a lot of stuff that Phil and I have talked about before. But as we were preparing for this event, yes, deepfakes are terrifying. Ben, I love your answer of removing the drudgery from work and giving people opportunity for more creative work. We'll definitely talk about that. Maybe that's the first thing that we can talk about. Um, oh, using English for development versus code. Code is now an output. That's cool. Job loss is terrifying. Um, impact, people not trusting anyone anymore. Yeah.
Mm.
And
Yeah,
such the sheer scope of efficiency and effectiveness. Totally.
and
Julia, I
Julia's
like the level you're thinking. Yeah.
intellectual property as well is a big hot topic that we've not really addressed yet, I don't think. Just we as in the world. But yeah, if we're working with AI, then who owns the intellectual property is an interesting philosophical slash legal question, I think.
Yeah. I want to get into that comment from Ben, I think is the first thing to dig in because Phil, we've talked about this before. So removing the toil from engineering work is something that AI could be a fantastic thing to do. Um, and Phil, when we were talking and in our many conversations, you've put forth this idea of like go lean or go deep. And I think that relates back to Ben's idea of like removing the drudgery from work and allowing humans to like transcend the toil and work on stuff that's a bit more um well fulfilling, I think, for us as human beings, but like maybe a bit more creative and a bit more impactful in the business. Can you talk a little bit about this like go lean versus go deep? Um
Hmm.
schema of thinking when it comes to bringing AI into organizations and how you're seeing AI being used in organizations?
Yeah, sure. And it is a great question. So thanks, Ben. I think it's the question that I tend to have first when I work with big organizations, to be honest, organizations of any size. I think one thing that I've noticed is that for lots of interesting reasons, I think, but we tend to often talk about AI as if it is its own force, whereas actually it is a decision that we as humans need to make. Like we control the impact of AI. And so, yeah, this framework that I've been using of this go lean or go deep just helps to articulate the fact that AI does not have a single impact, that the impact that it has depends on what we decide to do with it. So to give a concrete example, you can imagine something like call centers have been one of the first sorts of work to, like, maybe we would refer to that as drudgery, to use Ben's language, but it's been one of the first roles to be automated, if you like, by AI. So there's big companies like IKEA and British Telecom over here in the UK who have managed to automate about 90% of their call center effort by essentially training a machine on all of their recorded conversations and then building a bot. IKEA, it's called Billy after the bookshelf, which is hilarious. The question then becomes, so there is no doubt in my mind, and there's no, like, capitalism tells us that we will, I think, automate things that can be automated like that. The question then becomes, what as we as humans do with the spare labor? So in the case of British Telecom, the answer was job losses, and we go lean. So we remove our overheads, we reduce our headcount. In the case of IKEA, they decided to go deep. These are my labels, by the way, but by which I mean the however many hundred people who were made redundant, if you like, by AI have since been retrained to do work which, interestingly, like they had an amount of choice over. So it's like, what would make you feel most fulfilled? They were retrained and they're now bringing higher value to the organization. But more importantly, one of the goals was to make sure that these people were happier. So there's that. I think it's an interesting way to think about it and to take responsibility for the fact that the impact of AI is really about economic, social, cultural, political decisions. There is also, of course, like almost a third dimension. I think I mentioned yesterday, actually it was in a different talk yesterday, but I read a book on holiday called Fully Automated Luxury Communism. My partner was like, could you just read a Jackie Collins? However, what that presents a different dimension, which essentially says that if we use AI to automate drudgery, then maybe actually people just have more time to do more things that make them more happy and actually make them more productive. So maybe we actually just use that spare time to be at home more, to spend more time with friends, family, whatever. So it's interesting, but I think the key thing is that absolutely, I think can automate drudgery. But what that means for humans, I think, is a very human decision.
Yeah, I think it's such an interesting idea. And especially, I mean, the climate in tech this week is, I mean, you just open the news and you're reading about layoff after big rounds of layoffs. Like I feel like this week has hit especially hard. And I think that fear, and Barry answered or asked a question in the Q&A, is like, will AI be able to replace software engineers completely? I think is like right now in this economic belt tightening, I think that go lean model is probably what more companies are reaching toward. What I'm seeing from just like, you know, anecdotes, I haven't like done any like very disciplined research studies about this, is like, I don't think AI in a professional setting in engineering teams is like quite there yet. Where a business leader would say, I'm going to make a decision to lay off a part of my workforce and replace it with AI, or that my engineers are so much more productive now because we have AI augmentation that I now can reduce headcount by 20%. And actually on that, I want to share something with you. Let me pull this up. Those of you listening in might already have read the State of DevOps report for 2023. If not, I highly recommend that you get your paws on it. This is a report that's put out by Dora every year, and so you're likely familiar with the DORA metrics. We talk about these 4 key metrics, but they have so much more stuff that they do. They have capabilities. They put out these research reports. And what I found very interesting was that in 2023, they have a whole section, a whole capability dedicated to AI, and they haven't in the past. So there is a little bit more like disciplined research now about AI's impact. And the thing that I found so interesting, and I screenshotted this and sent it to Phil when I saw it, because I was like, you got to see this. They're doing studies on organizations and looking at organizations that have the technical capability of AI. And oddly enough, we're seeing like a minor decrease effect on software delivery performance and a substantial decrease on operational performance. And I think, I looked at that and I was like, why could that be? There's quite a lot of other papers about how AI is actually being used and sort of the maturity in our organization. But there's 2 things that stick out. One is that when you're doing code that's like majority is provided by AI or generated by AI, you have a less cognitive understanding of the code that you are then putting into production, whether it's high quality or low quality. And then also you spend more time reading and less time writing code, but it doesn't actually hasn't actually increased the efficiency effectiveness at all. Phil, we were talking a little bit about how like AI is really good right now in some scenarios, like for example, going from 0 to 1 or reorienting yourself. Like, what do you think about that? Those results from the DORA report, are they surprising to you?
I think not. When you shared that to me, I obviously dived straight in, and I think not, given who was involved and like how it was tested. As you say, I think there's quite a lot of research to show that AI can have significant impact. I think some of the statistics are between 40 and 50% increases in productivity. But I think there's 2 things at work there. One is, as you said, it depends who you are. So to go from 0 to 1, AI is brilliant at turning somebody who is not expert into somebody who is relatively expert, probably 40, 50% quicker than we could do without AI. However, if we put AI in the hands of people who are expert and they want to automate or augment their process, what we find is that it slows them down. And I'm finding this firsthand. So I run a boot camp every week for instructional designers, and the more experienced those instructional designers are, almost like the steeper the learning curve. And I think there's lots of reasons for that. I think we ask more questions when we're more experienced, but also it's about the way that AI is built. If we think about AI as a slice of a lot of averages, it's not necessarily expert in lots of things, but it knows a little bit about a lot of things. So it takes you from 0 to 1. I think the other thing is the way that the models have been built. And so to use an example from my world, which is predominantly the education world, if I ask AI to design me a course, it honestly does a pretty terrible job. But that's because that model has not been trained by experts in instructional design. And so again, it's just taken a slice of an average. And so I get a lecture and then a quiz and discussion, whatever it is. I get it over a number of weeks because that's the average. And I think that's what we're seeing here too. So I think there is a future, I think almost inevitably, where we build models, by software developers for software developers maybe, which are much better able and will have a significant impact on productivity. But right now we're in this very early phase where, as I say, it knows a little bit about lots of things. And so there's only so deep that it can go. So this doesn't surprise me. I think also the learning curve bit is important. What I have seen in practice is that once you get used to working with AI and prompting it right and all of these different things, then your productivity will increase. But initially, it definitely slows one down unless the machine is trained to be a specialist in your topic. So, for example, in the medical world, we're seeing some really interesting accelerations of specialist work, but that's because the models have been built specifically for that task.
Yeah, one of the questions I get, or that I have gotten from engineering leaders, executives, curious people at different organizations are like, why we have like they've maybe bought Copilot or something, and they're like, why isn't there more adoption? And I think Phil, in your answer is really this gem that it's not just about how mature and how good the AI tool is in and of itself, but we also have to know how to use it. And there's learning happening on both sides. Because you can't just take a developer who's never used AI and give them a tool and just expect magic to happen. There's a learning curve on both sides. And I think that's an area that's actually quite overlooked. One thing I find interesting about a lot of this research is that a lot of it is like opt in. You know, I'm interested in AI, I'm using AI, so I'm going to participate in this research, or you can actually get data from me because I am interested and I'm an early adopter. And so I always keep that in mind, as well as I'm looking through some of the latest research about like how might this actually apply at scale at a large organization? What impact on developer productivity could it have? Because the samples are sometimes, you know, and it's totally disclosed, it's in the research methods, but you need to make sure that you're looking at a population that matches the population at your actual organization. That's a really important thing.
Absolutely.
There's one thing actually, speaking of research, this this is a graph. I have it zoomed in just so that everyone can see. But this is a productivity assessment of code completion. And so what we're looking at here is like what the acceptance rate is of suggestions. And you know, when we're looking at like how does AI actually perform, one of the things we look at is like, is there an opportunity for a suggestion? Is that suggestion accepted? And then how long does that suggested code stick around? Like, does it actually make it into production? And Phil, to your point about like AI is really good from going to 0 to 1. What we see here is like in the purple, that's the weekend. And that acceptance rate is really high, higher on average than if we look at like these weekdays. Obviously, there's nighttime in there. People, not a lot of people are coding during nighttime professionally. But there's a slightly higher acceptance rate on the weekends versus during the work week. I have my opinions on why I think that is, but Phil, why do you think that is?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is, like you say, a good example of the 0 to 1 effect. This is people tinkering with new and exciting ideas in the time that they have. So if they have the time and space to be creative, they use AI to learn something new. And so I think like my interpretation of this is that it is another example of that. And I think that's also very exciting. To think about what that means in terms of, this is an interesting conversation that I've been having with them. I'm not sure I can name them, but a big corporate company is, what does that mean for like equity in the workplace, and equity of opportunity? Do we give AI to the people who are 0 to get them up to 1? Or actually do we want to protect the people who have worked many, many years to get to where they are? And like, I don't know, there's some very interesting politics there. But yeah, interested, Laura, to know your thoughts. I'm sure that your interpretation of the graph might be slightly more specific than mine.
I mean, I think that we generally have the same interpretation of it, which is like when people are on the weekend doing whatever it is, tinkering with stuff and using AI, and maybe the thing they're tinkering with is AI in general, acceptance rate is generally higher. I think as someone who's responsible for hiring, performance management, lots of these things, and also I'm coaching leaders who are responsible for those things. It's an interesting problem to think about, and I think Gareth had this question. Is AI more beneficial to less experienced engineers who has access to it? And we're thinking about, someone is coming from a computer science degree at a university. I know for my computer science program, it had almost nothing to do with software engineering and working in a software development team. And I think that's a lot. I think a lot of people have that same experience, to the point where like when I'm hiring for a role, I don't even look, I don't even care if you have a university degree because it's all about demonstrable demonstrable, whatever skills. And what I think when I look at this graph is like, who has time on the weekends to be learning a new skill? But that's not a problem with AI, right? That's just a general problem of opportunity and access and equity. And so that's interesting. I did read it wasn't a takedown of AI at all. It was someone's experience going through coding boot camp and reskilling into the tech industry. And one of the arguments was like, it's not worth it because by the time you complete this boot camp, the level that you are is basically what Copilot or any other AI tool is. And so why would someone make the decision to hire you versus just using an AI tool? What kind of long-standing effects do you think this might have on, I mean, the software development industry, but like in general as well, because that's not a problem that's isolated to just us in software development.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I'm hopeful, I'm optimistic in this, that actually what we're going to see is that, so in education terms, we might refer to it as like higher order skills. But by that, I mean, like, there is a difference between being able to do something that's very functional, or requires like the regurgitation of information that you have absorbed, versus things like analysis, critical thinking, innovative thinking, creativity. And so I wonder if what happens in this world where we delegate an amount of the drudgery, to use Ben's term, to a machine, what does that mean for the way that we, for the value that we as humans bring, and therefore for the skills that we need in order to be valuable in that world? And I do wonder. I think we're seeing this already in education. We're having to see it in education because in a world where a machine can write an essay, the system breaks. So education is broken. Some institutions have reacted by going back into the classroom, entirely unfeasible and unscalable and not sustainable. And so I think what we're starting to see more and more is actually a change in the way in which we teach and assess humans. And it is much less about write me an essay and tell me the things I told you in a slightly reframed way, and more about demonstrate the ability to, for example, work with AI. I mean, AI is a great example of a tool which needs very, very specific skills in order to be able to work with it. So I wonder if we will see the same shift in performance management in teams, where, yeah, there is an amount of delegation to a machine, and then our roles evolve accordingly, and we are. But then there's an interesting question there, Laura, about what are we? There's some, I think sometimes we assume like, oh, and we will focus on things like being creative and being innovative. However, and being empathetic is a big thing, because there's a lot of medical research, and it's like, well, maybe the humans will do the empathetic talking to patients bit, and the machine will be in the background doing the scan review. However, breaking news and cue for like an existential crisis. But AI so far has proven in blind testing in certain circumstances, particularly in the world of medicine, but to be better at original thinking, creative thinking, and empathetic communication than humans. And so it will be interesting. Like, I don't know what the bits that will be left for the humans will be. And I think that's the bit that maybe instills fear in us. I think that's the bit that makes AI different from other automations, machines, and like, you know, from examples from the Industrial Revolution and this kind of thing. It's it has some interesting implications on a like existential level, I think, as well, like, and a systemic level.
Yeah. And I think, Phil, this is a great opportunity to get into some of the thornier questions, maybe just one thorny question around AI that I've gotten from engineering leaders, but I've never actually seen anyone talk about it or acknowledge it, at least like in public. I'm sure someone's written about it on LinkedIn. I'm not saying I'm the first, but you know, if you're hiring or if you're doing a performance review, how can you evaluate the skills of an engineer, their coding skills, if they're coding with assistive technologies like AI? If you're hiring someone and you give them a take-home coding exam, how do you know that they are actually capable of doing it and they're not just using AI? Does it matter? Should it matter? Phil, what do you think about this? This is so parallel to, like, the university student who needs to
Yes.
write an essay, and some universities are saying, oh no, absolutely you cannot use AI and you're going to be expelled if you use it. And then others are like, no, great, you're going to have to use this at your job, so you better learn now.
Let's do this. Yeah. And in the latter scenario, what happens is that we encourage the use of AI because it increases efficiency, because it can increase effectiveness, but also just because, the World Economic Forum reported at the end of last year that the future is an AI-powered future. There is no doubt about it. We're going to need these skills in order to function at work. And so I think in that scenario, it's about not having the coding test anymore, kind of acknowledging that if that part has been automated either partially or fully, then if you think of it as a a collaborative approach between human and machine, what are the bits that the human needs to be responsible for? And I think part of it is demonstrating the ability to work really well with AI to make sure that you are using the right kind of coding technology, to have the methods to validate the quality and the speed of the output of human plus machine rather than just human or just machine. But the point I'm trying to make is that it's a very different skill set, and that we need to adapt who we hire, why, and what skills we class as high performance and low performance based on the fact that people now effectively, if you think about the AI calculator analogy is not helpful in some ways, but it's helpful, I think, here. It's like we had to change maths exams when we let calculators into the exam hall.
Mhm.
So how are we going to assess what we're going to assess in the workplace if we just accept that AI is part of every role?
Yeah. I mean, I think that parallel to all of these other innovations in the past is, I mean, I think it's appropriately placed here. I mean, I I think in 5 years or 10 years, when someone looks back and, I don't know, they're watching this conversation, so hi, 10 years in the future, and they're saying, why is this even a conversation of, like, not wanting someone to use AI during a job interview or in professional context? Like, it sounds as silly as, like, oh, you're not allowed to use a calculator if you're an accountant because you should be doing all the computation by hand. Or
Mm.
you're not allowed to use Google, or you're not allowed to use Wikipedia. I think it's going to feel just like that.
Mm.
It's just so new, and quite honestly, a little bit scary, because we're we're like on the boundaries of things that are a little bit scary, like deep fakes and all
Mm.
this, the military stuff that's been been in there, but in the chat. But yeah, I think it's interesting to see how software development organizations will need to fundamentally rethink what skills they are hiring for, when coding, which has been, there's I'm sure those of you who are listening in right now, if you think about how your company hires software engineers, I am sure there is a non-trivial percentage of you where a coding test is the first thing that you use to screen candidates. And what happens when that is just obsolete? And what else are you going to hire for? How are you going to assess what makes a good engineer if the coding part becomes supported so well by AI? I certainly know what I would answer, which is, like, we're looking for, product thinking. We're looking for people who are thinking around the code. There's been such an emphasis on, like, those inner loop versus outer loop tasks, where inner loop is like, I'm sitting down, I'm coding, getting feedback on my code. Then we have outer loop tasks, which is like, why are we building this? How are we releasing this to customers? Security, privacy, all of these things. I think those skills are going to come to the forefront when maybe it's drudgery, maybe it's toil of the code goes away, but where coding is perhaps a smaller percentage of what a developer ends up doing day to day or week over week.
Mhm.
Um, Phil, I'm
Yeah.
so glad. Thank you for sharing that answer, because so Phil said, different Phil said in the chat that his company had a way to deal with AI for interviews and challenges. Um, we expect new applicants to use AI in our online challenges.
Uh-huh.
That's fantastic. I think you're really like on the early adoption curve here. But I think I can't imagine a company succeeding who doesn't have that attitude about AI.
Yeah, and
I think
again, I
there's
think
risk, certainly. Yeah.
yeah.
Go
Sorry,
ahead,
Laura.
Phil.
I was going to say, I think it's the same in education. It just is not. Uh, it's not possible to exist in a vacuum, and this thing is already out of the box. I think there is also, like I said before, it's
Mhm.
just the way that capitalism works means that AI is just too delicious to resist. And also that it does offer potentially some great opportunities for everybody having maybe a more fulfilling life, or maybe doing less work. And so I think it's almost, yeah, I guess an interesting question would be, well, how would we keep doing what we do now? Like, and why would we bother doing that if, you know, for example, our coding can be automated and extend, then why would we have that as the focus of the role? What more could we do? Um, and I think that's it's scary though, I get that. And I think also the pace of the change
Mhm.
is pretty unprecedented. Like higher education in particular had to move faster than probably it ever has in hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years as an institution, because the system broke like that overnight. So I think that's what's unsettling here as well, is that it's something that we have to respond to. We can't take our time on it. We need to do something now, even if it's not the thing that we do in the long term. It feels like somebody's already set the
Mm,
system on fire, so we have no need to start adapting, because I think the alternative is just not practical.
yeah. Someone had a good question in the chat just from a few minutes ago, actually, about like what are actually some of the results in organizations that are using AI.
Mm.
And there's so much, there's now data on this, and I'm not going to just read you the data. I'll send you the link to the paper. But what I think is most interesting is looking at how it's changed and progressed in a few of the different studies. So this is a paper called Taking Flight with Copilot. It's looking at 3 different studies of Copilot and how it's used, what impact it's had on productivity. And I think so, like the key findings are actually some good points here. And someone just asked, like, Sesh, how do we avoid the problem of AI created garbage and nonsense, like contaminating valid contributions? I mean, no matter the field, but like let's just apply this to like software engineering context. I think it's just so funny. Participants reported spending less time on Stack Overflow, but now have less of an understanding of why the code works.
Mm.
And again, there's like this division between computer and human comes up in this next case study where it's like, are you willing to give up the autonomy and control of really deeply understanding all of the code that you are writing, or all of the code that you're now responsible for and putting it into production? This is probably one of the stickiest points,
Mm.
and where it can be actually very damaging for a team. I also think here is one of the big opportunities. And so my kind of like my, I guess it's a hot take. I don't know what we're calling it these days, what the kids are calling it. But my sort of bold opinion is that I think that in the future, the biggest application and biggest efficiency gains that we're going to see from AI is in fact not in the coding task at all. I think it's everything around the coding task. And in that study as well, there's some case studies of people being given a brand new like a brand new code base and saying, go build this feature in the code base. But they have AI to help them understand what's going on in that code base. And maybe it's even a language that they've never used before, but they understand principles of programming and they're able to be quite productive. I think using AI for learning is a huge opportunity in our field. If you can imagine AI having access to all of your PRs, all of your Jira tickets, all of your past incidents and incident reports and retrospectives and postmortems and whatever, and being able to ask a question and get a response immediately, I mean, think about what that would change in your workday, in your development flow. I think that's a really interesting application, one that I'm very excited to see come come to life. I don't know, Phil, how long do you think that's going to take? Do we have that now?
Yeah, I mean,
I
we're
mean,
very
this is sort of
close.
what your new company does.
Yeah,
Because
funny enough.
that's an application of how you're using
Yeah,
AI, is like, let's ingest all this information and help people learn from it in better ways. And
yeah.
regardless of the industry.
Yeah, so one of the things that we've known for like 30 odd years is the more tailored the learning experience to the human, the more impact it has. That's not all it takes for this experience to be impactful, but that it really matters. And that actually one of the reasons that learning in general and online learning in particular has failed, and I will go so far as to say it has failed. We could talk about that, but essentially it's not had the impact that we hoped. You mentioned before the first MOOC, we hoped that
Mhm.
that was going to give everybody everywhere access to brilliant learning, but it didn't have the impact. And that's partly because it's one size fits all. It's partly because it's built for a system of Western education for people who are used to and know how to do lecture-based self-led learning. It's a very narrow view of the world. So actually, if we can create a situation where we can feed very specific information to a machine, and then it is able to deliver back that information in the right moment, in the right way for the human being, then its impact on, I guess, productivity ultimately, but also on our knowledge and skills is significant. And this is just another example beyond coding, like you say, where I think AI is going to be pretty radical, to be honest. There are other people doing interesting things, like I know there's some the L&D leader at Starbucks is playing with ingesting everything he knows and building a GPT version of himself so that as and when he retires, his institutional knowledge is not lost. And actually, while he's still in role,
Mhm.
it can be redistributed. And so I think there's, yeah, it's just one example of the beyond coding type use cases, which are happening already, and I think potentially will be, yeah, transformative.
Mhm. Yeah, and we've seen some very real efficiency gains with AI assisted coding. And again, those of you who are listening now, and those of you who are watching the recording, I'll make sure to send out some of these studies so you can see the real impact. We are at a point where the coding task is, sometimes twice as efficient when we have AI assistive technologies, depending on the seniority of the person. I think we talked about that a little bit before. I think AI is generally more useful for those who are earlier in their career or doing something in a domain where they don't know a lot. So, for example, an onboarding to a new code base, learning a new language, something like that. Um, I think it's interesting to see what the next step is and where we as humans decide to take the next step. Because Phil, going back to your very first point, like, none of this exists without humans deciding this is the thing that we want to build next, or the market saying this is the thing that there's economic need for. It's not just like we haven't reached, like, it's not doing this on its own. There's
Mm,
people making decisions, and I think it's interesting to see what will happen.
mm.
Um, One thing, Phil, I want to touch on just as we come into our final couple minutes of this discussion was from a conversation that we had just the other day. AI does not get fatigued. It does not get stressed out. It doesn't get tired. Um, we talked to some about like incident response and outages and how AI can perhaps be a welcome addition to some of the incident response. Can you talk a little bit more on sort of like AI as a augmentation to humans doing high stress, high
Yeah,
fatigue work?
yeah, and arguably this is I think it's always interesting actually to look for the bits, look for the areas, not necessarily, oh, is it drudgery, is it high level, but like what are the things which are really important, but which suffer sometimes, or which we're not great at sometimes just because we're human. And so, yeah, one example is delegating more and more in the medical world, things like analyses of scans, um, data, like whatever it is, because the machines have been trained by the humans, we should say, and all of the outputs are validated by the humans. So it's very much like a collaboration. But as you say, the AI has not been up all night doing an operation. The AI is not stressed because they have to tell somebody that they're sick. The AI does not tire and does not have inconsistencies. Of course, it might have biases, and this is a whole other conversation that the data matters. So it's a really interesting question around like if the machine can do it better than us, should we delegate it to it? I think the medical world provides an interesting question though, because for example, as much as a machine has been proven to be better. I think a machine hits something like 98%, and a really qualified doctor hits like 96% when diagnosing based off scans. When asked, most humans would still like the human to have looked at the scan, not the machine. So there's some interesting questions here, bigger questions, I think, about human machine interaction and whether we want these machines if we can build them. But in terms of the software development example, I think, yes, absolutely. In those high stress moments, imagine having the calm, cool headed person that says, this is the problem, this is the answer. But then the other thing I would raise is that probably with machine learning and predictive analytics, we might be able to get to a situation where the fire doesn't happen in the first place. There was a really interesting article that's just been released today on how AI has been now fed enough data to be able to predict the incidence of pancreatic cancer way before people get it. And so I think there's also all sorts of different paradigms beyond generative AI and categorizing AI machine learning. So things like predictive analytics that actually will change the whole way we think. Maybe we just won't have fires anymore. But certainly if there are fires, then I think there are examples where the machine does a better job of putting it out than the tired, emotional, stressed, whatever human.
Yeah, I think the predictive analytics part of AI is fascinating. I mean, what a world would it be if, as part of our CI, or like when you commit code, there's some analysis done that said like, hey, in these circumstances, in these specific circumstances, which happen normally on the first Tuesday of the month, like, or whatever it is for your business, this is gonna fail. Or like if you're working in e-commerce and you release something and it's like on Black Friday, this is not gonna hold up.
Yeah.
Just to have access to that information immediately, I think is we talk about efficiency gains in the coding task, but can you imagine the efficiency gains from knowing that information at the start? And I think that's where we're headed,
Yeah.
in which it's very exciting to me.
100%. And there's some really interesting stuff. I can't now remember what it's called, but it's called like Second World or something like that. I can share some links. But the ability to recreate conditions by AI and actually just have it run. And then, as you say, it falls over on Black Friday. We're almost predicting the future there, and we anticipate and adjust. And so you can have an AI that's 2, 3, 4 steps ahead of you, and mitigating the risks before they happen for real. So yeah, I think there's some very, very interesting stuff that we've only touched the surface right now in this session, but also just generally as a discipline. I think yeah, there's a lot still for us all to learn, I think.
Yeah. Great. Well, thank you, Phil, for joining. I want to ask you one final question to wrap up. And this comes from, I think, in chat here. If computers are better at reading code and computers are better at writing code, what's the space for humans? Like, can we automate ourselves out of a job and like live in the Star Trek future that we've all been promised, like on a spaceship where our basic needs are taken care of? Like, do you think that's possible? And do you think that's responsible?
I think we don't know. I think what we do know is that AI is built by humans. It's human curated and selected data, and therefore it requires humans both to input stuff and to validate the output. So AI is more of a apprentice than a professor. And so I think, of course, it's going to get more and more intelligent, but I think there's always going to be a role for the human to own the machine, to take some sort of political moral responsibility for what's going in and what's coming out. And we're seeing that already. If you look at the EU AI Act, it's saying we humans are going to take responsibility for this. So I think there'll always be that. But yeah, I mean, it goes back to my catchy holiday read. Fully automated luxury communism is a potential reality where actually we as humans have been trained like a machine to operate like a machine, and actually we don't need to. Maybe we don't. Maybe there's a future where work is not central to our lives in the way that it has been since the 19th century. I don't think we know yet.
Yeah.
I think it can be responsible as long as everybody has equal access to AI and equal representation within AI. Then it could be a great leap forward, but it comes with a lot of risk, and so yeah, it will be interesting to see where we take it. But it's a political decision ultimately, economic, political, cultural. Um, yeah, it's
Yeah.
it's quite the roller coaster.
Just some light thinking for everyone on this Thursday. Phil, thank you so much for
Yeah,
taking the time to share all of your depth and breadth of experiences working with AI. I will note, and I know we're just a few minutes over, but so Phil's just founded a company that's working on AI and applying AI to different problems, especially on the learning side of things. I know there's been a lot of layoffs, and maybe some of you are engineers interested in AI who have been laid off. Phil and her business partner are looking for some founding engineers. Maybe Phil, should they find you on LinkedIn if they're maybe interested?
absolutely. Please do. Yes, we're
Yeah,
building a
find Phil on LinkedIn.
interesting AI startup. So yes, I'm on LinkedIn. It would be fabulous to hear from you.
Wonderful. I'll just drop that because there's people out there looking for a job and maybe you have the right one for them. So
Beautiful.
wonderful. Thank you all of you who were like there was a very spirited discussion in the chat. I love to see it. I'll send out the recording of this along with all the papers that I referenced and the link to the Dora report and everything so you can continue to learn on your own. Wonderful to see you and I hope to see you at one of these events in the future as well. Take care, everyone. Have a good day.
Thanks,
See
everyone.
ya.